your lazy students might not be lazy at all. And hopefully during this session, during the next half an hour, you will find out why. Before we start, I asked Will and his colleagues to set up 3 poll questions for you, because I would like to get some information from you. If we can get up if we get the first question up, please, Will. Yes, there you go. So first of all, talking about laziness in this session and perceived laziness, how many of your students would you say are lazy or unmotivated to learn English? You can go from hardly any to the majority. If Will, if you can read out the answers to me, because I don't think that I can see them.
Yes, I can see them here, Boelo. I'll let it settle for a minute.
Yeah. It's a lot of people here. It's not knowing that they are lazy, but this is about perceived, that you would go into the class in a teacher's room and you would talk about a student, and the teacher would go, oh yeah, that's a lazy bum, you know, that type of student. Oh wow, she's not very motivated to learn English.
So we've got about 7% on hardly any. Maybe around 10% is 26% of people are answering that one. Then 34% people say around 20%. Almost half of them it's difficult because it's all percentages. 25% say almost half of them, and 8% say the majority of them.
It's basically between probably around 20 and almost half of them. So basically between 20 and 40, more or less what people say. Now, the next question, maybe something about yourself, about your own experience. It's interesting for me to know as well. The average number of students that you teach on an annual basis. So how many students do you usually see annually? It could be that you're working in a school, but not in summer. That might be less, but it can also be that you're working in a private language school with a lot of different groups, and even do some summer camps. So just for me to know, and for you as well, later on, I'll let you know why, if it is less than 25 or even over 100. We'll see what type of teachers we have in the room.
Okay, so
yes,
9% say less than 25. 12% say between 25 and 50. 17% say between 51 and 75. 23% say between 76 and 100. And 38% say over 100.
That's actually a lot of teachers that see over 100 students on a yearly basis. Now, my last question is probably easier to answer. This is your teaching experience. So basically, how long have you been doing what you're doing? Are you a completely novel teacher, so you basically just finished your degree and just started, or between 2 and 5, 6 and 10, 11 and 20, or a veteran teacher and you've been in this for over 20 years?
Okay, still lots of responses coming in. I'll give it a sec. Okay. 2% less than 1. 13% between 2 and 5. 15% between 6 and 10. 26% between 11 and 20. 44% say over 20. Wow.
Wow, we've got very experienced teachers here.
Crumbs.
It's wow, it's amazing. If we add that between 11 and 20, so if we put basically everything above 10, I think that's more than half of the teachers, Will, right? That is, I didn't put it in my mind. My working memory isn't that good. You'll find out later why, but that's a lot of experience here. Is that extra weight on my shoulder now?
It is, I'm afraid, Boelo. Yeah, you've got some experience watching you now.
Yeah. Now it's like, is that true what you're saying? No, it is. No, but it's lovely. I really enjoy that when that happens. Thanks very much, Will.
For sure, no worries.
What I would like you to do now, you have analyzed yourself as well, the number of students you see on an average in an average year and your years of experience. I know you're not math teachers, but the math I'm going to ask you to do is not that very advanced. It's not rocket science. I'm going to ask you to multiply the years of experience, so to multiply the years that you've been teaching English by the average amount of students you've seen on a yearly basis. So say if you've had 10 years, well, say some teachers even more than 20. So say you've had 20 years teaching experience and you have an average 100 students per year. 20 times 100 is 2,000. And then realize that this number 2,000, that is the amount of students, that's the number of students that you have seen in your career. So in your career, you will have seen 2,000 students. 2,000 students pass through your classes. Now, when you have that number in your mind and you remember what you responded to the first question, which was about the perceived amount of lazy or unmotivated students in your class, and say you set 20%, I mean, just for the sake of argument, say you set 20%, which is more or less the majority between 20 and 40, 20% of 2,000 is 400. So you would say that you have seen 400 lazy students in your teaching career. And now, after 20 years, there's this Dutch guy living in Spain at the Global Teachers Festival saying to you that maybe those 400 lazy students weren't lazy at all. And we're going to find out why. But it's completely normal that you would think they were lazy, because this happens a lot. It happens to a lot of students that are labeled as lazy, as dumb, as unmotivated. Students like Tommy. And I'm going to tell a little short story about Tommy. Tommy is an 8-year-old boy. This is a true story. So Tommy's an 8-year-old boy, and one day he's in school, and after school the headmaster walks up to me and says, "Tommy, here's a letter. I need you, when you get home, I need you to give this letter to your mom. She should read this." And when he gets home, he gives the letter to his mother. She reads it, and the poor mother, she starts crying. He says, "Mommy, what does the letter say? Why are you crying?" And she said, "Well, actually, the letter says," and the mother is lying. She says, "The letter says, we cannot teach your son Tommy because he is too intelligent. There's nothing we can do for him. He is too bright. He is too wonderful. We think it is better that you teach him yourself." But he will find out later in his life, Tommy, that actually the letter did say, "We're very sorry, we can't teach your son because your son is lazy, your son is unmotivated, your son is basically dumb. So there's nothing we can do." So actually, Tommy is one of that maybe 20%, 25 perceived percent of students that are perceived lazy, unmotivated, and dumb. And this is usually the label that students get when they are dyslexic and they are undiagnosed. I'm going to let that sink in maybe for a second. We said 20% or even more of students perceived as lazy or unmotivated in your classes. And now I'm saying that maybe these students are dyslexic, because this is what happens with dyslexic students. When we talking about percentages, when we talk about dyslexia, the International Dyslexia Association and many other sources usually work with the same numbers. They say that 15 to 20% of the population shows signs of dyslexia. 15 to 20%. When you were talking about perceived laziness in your students, you said many of them 20 to 30%, or 20 even towards 40%. So here you go. You see this correlation between the students that you might label as lazy, but maybe there's something else, and maybe there is a dyslexia behind that perceived laziness of that student. Now, if you look at this slide, and if you look at it well, you see shows signs of dyslexia. It doesn't say is dyslexic, it shows signs of dyslexia, because one of the main issues with dyslexia, one of the big problems, and Will mentioned it before as well, I have only recognized my dyslexia. I only know that I'm dyslexic for about 7 years, more or less. The problem is that up to 80% of students with dyslexia even leave school without a diagnosis. And this is from the British Dyslexia Association. So that is 8 out of 10 dyslexic students leave school without knowing they're dyslexic. And many of them will even live their whole life, even die, without knowing they're dyslexic. And these children will go through school, all these years in school, thinking and believing they're lazy, thinking and believing they're unmotivated and thinking and believing they're dumb. And this is true, and this comes up over and over again when you talk to dyslexic students and you interview families of dyslexic students as well. Now, what I would like you to take away from this session, this is why I created this session. I would like you to take away 3 things. It's just half an hour, but I think we can work on this. First of all, I would like you to take away what dyslexia is, so to have a better idea of what the condition is. I would like you to take away red flags. So when you walk into the classroom, you can start recognizing, again, the possible signs of dyslexia or the signs of possible dyslexia. And I'm going to give you 5 teaching tips. So 5 things that you can do with your students in the classroom. And this is very important. The teaching tips that you use for your students with dyslexia work for all your students. It is never a matter of, this is for my 20% of dyslexic students and this is for the rest. It is always, what I do for my dyslexic students is adapted in such a way, is inclusive in such a way that I can use it for the whole classroom. It is not about putting extra work on your plate. It's all about taking work off your plate. It's all about making the teacher's life. But first of all, let's talk about what is dyslexia. It's a very complex condition to explain in a simple way, because dyslexia includes a lot of different elements. I'm going to go over a few of them a bit later. But if I would have to phrase it in one sentence, it would be this. It would be the dyslexic brain processes information in a different way. I'm going to explain what I mean with this, so to make it a little bit more visual for you. Let's imagine, to make it, for this argument, to make it simple, let's imagine that learning anything, so also learning a language, is nothing more than connecting 2 neurons in the brain. Yeah, so it's neuron A and neuron B are communicating, they're connecting. I basically take information from neuron A, from neuron B. That's learning, okay? Now, instead of neurons, for my example, I'm going to talk about villages. So I have village A and village B. And what I do in my brain, I take information from one village to the other one. And I'm going to explain in a very simple way, I'm going to explain 3 different types of brains. Now, the first brain, to take information from point A to point B, the first brain uses a Ferrari. Now, I don't know about you, I don't have a Ferrari. I actually never driven one, but I do gather that a Ferrari should be able to drive up to 230 kilometers an hour or even faster. So imagine you have an amazing fast Ferrari, and we have an American highway between village A and village B, like these 10 lanes one way and 10 lanes the other way, and no speed limit. So we can really take our Ferrari to full speed, hardly any traffic, from village A to village B. So bang, split second, information is there. Again, this is not a scientific way of explaining the brain, but a very easy way to understand. This is how many times the autistic brain works. Now, Claire already talked about the autistic brain and how many times these students are actually very fast in processing information. Well, this is because their brain processes information in Ferrari in many cases. Now, the second brain processes information like this. This is a family car. This is a family car on a normal road, like maybe maximum speed is 80 or 100 kilometers an hour. I'm living in Spain, so I'm going to say that this is a Seat Ibiza, but wherever you live, you can change the brand. And this just is a normal speed, so to speak, between village A and village B. The information gets there. There's no problem whatsoever. And this is what we could call a neurotypical brain. So Claire has talked a lot about neurodiverse brains, which is about 20-something% of the population, which also means then that the neurotypical brain is the rest of the population. It's everybody who is not neurodiverse. And the issue is that education in general, so our educational system, is based on neurotypical brains. So you have been taught, TEFL course or a CELTA course, you have been taught to teach neurotypical brains. You have been taught to teach people who take information from village A to village B in a family. Now, the third brain, I guess you will understand where this is going. The third brain is the dyslexic brain. And the dyslexic brain goes like this. The dyslexic brain processes information on a bicycle. And I like it because every time I explain this and I have dyslexic people in the room, they all go like, "Oh, that really looks like my brain." And to be very honest, it does actually look like my brain as well. So my brain processes information many times slower. It takes me longer to process information, but on my way from village A to village B, I also have more time. I have the opportunity to look around, so I can enjoy my views. I can say, "Oh, that's a beautiful meadow. Oh, that's a nice little pond. Oh, there's ducks in there. Oh, there's some cows in there. They're eating. Oh, it's a beautiful farm over there that I see in the far." And oh, maybe I can take a detour because I think there's some apples growing over there. Maybe I can take some apples and put them in my bag as well. And maybe in the meantime, something falls out of it. I'm losing some information on the way between A and B. And then when I get to village B, and this is very important to understand, when I get to village B, I can enter village B from whatever angle I like. This is a very important concept for me to understand. So if it's in a Ferrari, like 10 lanes, there's only one way to get into village B. If it's on a normal road, there might be 2 or 3 different ways to enter village B. But if I'm on my bicycle and I'm a little bit anarchic, I really can enter village B from many different angles. And this is both a weakness and a strength of the dyslexic brain. So it's not that we can't do certain things, it's just that we do it differently, and sometimes we might take longer doing so. Now, talking about red flags, which was number 2 on the list. One of the main red flags, there are many, there's a whole list of items that you can go through to screen for dyslexia, to try to recognize dyslexia in your students. I'm going to give the most important ones. And maybe the most important red flag is the unexpectedness. Now, I'm going to explain what I mean. Unexpectedness, which is also called the discrepancy model. And the discrepancy model is all about what the student knows. So I know that you know this, and what the students can show you, what the student can produce. And I'm going to explain this, same as with the analogy before, I'm going to explain this with an example. Imagine that language learning is nothing more than a combination of learning grammar and vocabulary. I know it's more, but for this example, I just want to simplify this. So it's learning grammar, learning vocabulary. I do both, bang, I know a new language. And imagine at the beginning of a course, you have students and you just want to check their level, just as an activity, just to see where everybody stands. And I say to my students, okay, kids, teens, whatever, we are going to do a speaking activity. I want you to talk for 5 minutes to your partner about, I don't know, your weekend, just the weekend or the week or whatever. Talk about this. And you have this one student who just starts rattling away, just starts talking and talking and talking and and with good pronunciation and intonation and prosody, amazing grammatical structures, very rich vocabulary that you would go like, wow, where does this vocabulary come from? Even idioms that are actually from a higher level. So basically, you would say this student is here. This student is top of class. And you actually wonder if that student might not have to move up a level. But you don't. And maybe better that you don't. Because next class, same group, you say to the same group of students, hey, we're going to do another exercise. And now instead of talking about your weekends, your holidays, we're going to write about it. So it's the same topic, basically same vocabulary, same grammatical structures, everything's here, but now we're going to do it in writing. And at the end of the class, you ask them for like a 1-page writing. At the end of the class, that particular student hands in 2 mere paragraphs. A very short writing, 2 paragraphs, very poor grammar, very poor vocabulary, very repetitive structures as well. Something that you would go like, honestly, you, and even with stupid spelling mistakes. This is when the student is here, actually almost bottom of class. And this is when you as a teacher would say, hey, but this student can do more if he wants to. This is an argument that dyslexic students hear a lot. You can do more if you want to. And you say, why? Well, because I have seen it. I have seen you producing this, and now you are producing that. So maybe you are lazy, maybe you are unmotivated, uninterested, whatever. But the thing is, the students can do more, and this is the discrepancy model. The student can do more if it is in a different format. So the student can produce if it is in spoken format, but cannot produce it if it is in written format. It's that unexpectedness, that discrepancy, which is one of the main red flags when screening for dyslexia. Other red flags, as I said before, dyslexia includes a lot of different elements. There's a whole list of elements, but the most important ones, I'm going to go over them right now. The first is phonological processing. Now, dyslexia is all about phonological awareness. It's the brain, how the brain processes phonology, and the understanding that language is built up of phonemes, of small parts of the sounds. That sometimes is very difficult. Usually it's difficult for the dyslexic brain to process, and it is more difficult to process reading. So it is the decoding of the written word that is more difficult for the dyslexic student. It takes longer. It's on a bike than for neurotypical students, which makes the dyslexic students a slower reader. So usually dyslexic students read much slower than other students in the class. In my case, for instance, wherever I am, whatever happens, I always read slower than the vast majority of people around me. It's not that I can't read, it's just that it takes me longer to do so. We're usually also slower writers, and maybe even worse writers than non-dyslexics. Not that we can't write, it's not that we can't think. It's a mix of, again, that whole process where the reading is a process of decoding. It is processing the written word into a spoken word in my brain. With the writing, it is taking a spoken word or a concept in my brain and transfer that to a written word. That is the encoding process. That takes longer as well, but it's also organizing the ideas in my head of what I want to write on a piece of paper. It's organizing it on the piece of paper, making it in a sequence, and then the actual physical writing, which is many times more difficult for dyslexic students as well. And then we have attention deficit. Then now you might say, oh, no, Boelo, no. You're overstepping your boundaries here. This is not you. You shouldn't be talking about this. That's the next talk. That's Vicky's talk, which is really good as well. So you better stay, which is about attention deficit. No, dyslexia as well. So dyslexia also has to do with attention deficit. And what you will see, and when you have done the whole 3 sessions, so by all means stay until the end, you will see that there's a lot of similarity between autism, dyslexia, ADHD. It is actually called comorbidity. This is the overlap. There is a very high overlap between the 3 conditions. When you have a autistic person or a person with autism, it is very likely, or it can be, that a person also has ADHD. When you have someone with ADHD, it's very likely that they also have dyslexia, etc. So there is a very high level of comorbidity. Attention deficit, very important for students with dyslexia. We find it very difficult to focus and to keep attention for a long period of time. So anything that's over 7 or 10 minutes. And the last of my red flags is working memory. So many students with dyslexia have a very bad, limited working memory. Usually a neurotypical student can manipulate up to 5 or 7 chunks of information in their working memory at the same time. A dyslexic student, maybe 2 or 3. So when you give a lot of instructions at the same time, do this and this and this and this and this, that's 5, that's too much. If we give them too much vocabulary, if we talk too much, if it's too much grammar, if I write on the board and talk at the same time and ask them to do something in their notebook, that's too much at the same time. It's all to do with working memory and attention deficit. Now, the beauty is that dyslexia is not all about weaknesses. And what we've looked at so far, is all about weaknesses. But Dr. Sally Shaywitz, and she's one of the most renowned experts worldwide on dyslexia, she describes dyslexia very wisely as an island of weaknesses in a sea of strengths, or even an ocean of strength. And this is very much true, because whenever you have a dyslexic student in front of you, it is not only about the weaknesses, it should also be about the strengths. If it is a student that only has or only shows the weaknesses, it might even not be dyslexia. So dyslexia really has that strength side to it as well. We're going to go over some of the strengths right now, so you can see what they are. But before I go there, I do want to stress that usually the problem with dyslexia is that society in general, and the students as well, we are so tremendously focused on the weaknesses. We are so tremendously focused on what the students can't do, on what doesn't work for them, that we completely forget their strengths. And I believe that if we turn that around, and without forgetting the weaknesses, we learn what the strengths of our students are, and we find that out, we can use that to our advantage when we teach these students. Strengths of dyslexic students. First of all, dyslexic students are very creative, very, very creative. When you've got a dyslexic student in your class, bound to be someone who can also draw very well, or they come up with the amazing stories. They're usually very funny. They're very humoristic. They can come up from different angles. They might be good actors. They might be good singers. They might be good painters. They might be good at fixing things as well. They're usually very creative. They're usually at least average intelligent, if not above intelligent. Actually, one of the tests that you have to do when you're being diagnosed is an intelligence test. So they have to make sure that your problems with reading and writing, or maybe other problems, do not have to do with your intelligence. Big picture and out of the box thinking. Dyslexics are extremely good at this. For us, it is more difficult to see or to identify or focus on minor details. But if you give me the big picture, if I can put it in context, it's very important. If I can put it in context, everything is much easier for me to understand. Plus, with the creativity as well, the out-of-the-box thinking, I can come up with ideas that maybe other people would not have thought of, and for me it's completely logical to do so. I can also solve problems that neurotypical people might find more difficult to solve. And then I could even think like, how can you not see this? I remember at the school that I used to run for 25 years, there would be many situations where my colleagues would walk up to me and would say, "Oh, Boelo, we've got a problem, we've got this issue, we've been debating for, I don't know, maybe 1 hour, and it was 3 of them, and we're trying to solve this problem, but we really don't know what to do. Can you help us?" And it would literally, I'm not exaggerating, it would literally take me 4 to 5 questions, a little mind map, which I would draw with those questions, and 2 or 3 minutes to solve their problem. I could look at it, I would create the big picture for myself, I would solve the problem. So yeah, this is the solution. And they would look at me as if I were some kind of guru, and they would say, "How on earth can you see this? How it's 1 hour and we can't, and you can in 2 minutes?" And then I, in the end, would say, well, I process information differently. I took this on a bicycle, I took a detour, I took it one way and the other. So this is one of my strengths, but there are many weaknesses that I have as well. So everyone has something on either side. And this one, 3D thinking. Dyslexics are very good at 3D thinking. And what I mean by 3D thinking, I'm going to explain to you. I'm going to give you an example. That's probably better. I'm going to give you an example. Think of a car in your head. Just picture a car in your head. When you've got it, look at it from the other side. Now, look at it from the rear. Look at it from the front. Look at it from the top. Look at it from the bottom. Now, open the trunk and look into the trunk. Now, if you, with every instruction, with every prompt, if you have had a different image in your head, so I think it was about 6 or 7 different instructions, if you have had 6 or 7 different images in your head, that's a very neurotypical way of thinking, of representing information in your head. A very dyslexic person would have had a car in their head, and they would have turned the car around, or they would have walked around the car. They would have literally manipulated the image in their head in a 3D way. This is why many dyslexics end up working in engineering, in architecture, in designing, anything that needs those skills, those 3D thinking. And do you remember Claire before, what she said about about 007, about James Bond and his colleagues, problem solving, big picture thinking, being creative, out of the box thinking, all strengths that you need for those kind of jobs as well. So now we've looked at what dyslexia is, that it is a different way of the brain in processing the information it receives. We have looked at the red flags, the unexpectedness, we've looked at the weaknesses, we've looked at the strengths. We have seen that it is an island of weaknesses in a sea of strengths. And honestly, when you do screen for dyslexia, you have to look at both sides, the weaknesses and the strengths. And now we're going to the next one. We're going to the next section. This is going to be about teaching tips. So I'm going to give you 5 teaching tips. I think we've got time enough for this. 5 teaching tips that you can take straight away into your classroom Monday morning, or if you work on Sunday or Saturday, next class, and use this with your students. And remember, this doesn't only work for your neurodiverse students or your dyslexic students, this also works for the rest of your students. Number 1, less text, more visuals. I'm not saying no text, I'm saying less text, okay? It is clear. But I do say more visual, so more visual material. Dyslexic students are visual thinkers. We are much more visual than verbal thinkers. And visual thinking also is faster, so the brain processes information faster when it is visual than when it is verbal, when it is text-based. I mean, we do say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And it is true because it is much faster. And the visual thinking, that's one of the strengths of the dyslexic student. The use of colors is very important. We use colors for everything we do with dyslexic students. We use colors to highlight the important parts of text, of an explanation, or of a word. So if you use a text, we use colors. We either highlight them like this, or we change the colors of the letters, the phonemes. It could be to highlight a phoneme, like here, the OU is what phoneme, so there might be a spelling issue with my student. It could be a keyword in a text. I want to highlight the important words in a text. It could also be an idiom that I want to highlight, or it could be grammar. I could highlight the ing ending because that's what maybe we are working on. But, and this is very important, I have to be coherent. I have to be coherent in the use of my colors and in the use of my visuals as well, because this is not about filling the page with 10,000 colors. It is not, oh yeah, this guy Boelo, he told us that dyslexic students are very creative. So, we'll just chuck in 20 images on the page and I'll just make sure there are at least 15 different colors, just put the whole rainbow there as well, just to make it nice and appealing for students with dyslexia. No, that's making it worse. It's not about overwhelming them. It is about making it useful for them. So have few visuals, but very powerful ones, and be coherent in your visuals over time, and use your colors wisely, not too much at the same time. Use it very, very wise. Holistic approach. Holistic approach is all about how you explain things to students, how you teach students. I always give the same example. If you give me an exercise and the exercise has 10 questions and I have to fill in the gaps with maybe grammar, yeah, so maybe conjugation of verbs, and it's 10 questions that have no relation to each other, so it's 10 individual questions about random different things. That is more difficult for me to process than when you give me a text that is all connected, so that's all coherent. It's a text about one topic with the 10 gaps. So for you as a teacher, I'm still doing a grammar exercise because I'm still doing that in the same text. But for me, it is much more easier to do this because it is in a context. I can see this. And if it is individual questions, which is smaller, which is more detailed, it's much more difficult for me to do this. It's an example of how we can work holistically with our students. There's many more things we can do, but just to explain what I mean. This one is element, chunking. You will hear this over and over again today. I think you heard it from Claire. It's very likely that you're going to hear this from Vicky as well. Chunking is all about how you break up what you do in class, how you break up your material for your students. Remember what we talked about before. Remember that we talked about the working memory. Remember that we talked about the attention span. So chunking is all about helping these students digest the information. So we want to give them chunkable chunks that are chewable, that are digestible for our students. That's what we do. I usually say one concept at a time, one concept per chunk. Chunk is done, a brain break, new chunk, brain break, new chunk, etc. And the very last teaching tip for you is giving very, very, very clear instructions. Yeah, Claire said it before, probably Vicky will say it later as well, because this works for all neurodiverse students. Giving clear instructions is adamant for students with dyslexia. Why? Because remember, these students process information on their bicycle. And I told you at the beginning, they can enter village B from whichever angle they like. So when you give them instructions, you think it's clear for you? Definitely not, because they can interpret it in 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 different ways that you would never think of. So make sure that the instructions are very clear, the steps are very clear, and maybe even ask your students to reflect back on you and say, these are the instructions, what do you have to do? What have you understood by the instructions that I just gave you? And then see what their reaction is. That's it. That leads us to Tommy. Remember the story at the beginning, the true story about Tommy? So Tommy's mother started teaching him for many, many years in different ways. She actually used the strategies that we were just talking about because she knew that he was a holistic thinker. She could see that he was very good at thinking out of the box. He was very creative. He was inventive. She would use very different strategies because actually he was an inventor. And one of the things that he invented over his life, very prolific life, one of the things he invented was the light bulb. So obviously now you go like, well, maybe it's not this Tommy, maybe it is this Tommy that I was talking about. Actually, I was talking about the life of Thomas Alva Edison, who was very dyslexic, who was kicked out of school as a child. His mother taught him in a very different way with very different teaching strategies. And this is what made him such a wonderful and beautiful and amazing inventor. So next time you see a lazy or perceived lazy student in your class, maybe think, is the student lazy? Or maybe is the student not lazy? And maybe I have a neurodiverse brain sitting right in front of me. Thank you very much. And as I always like to finish everything I do, long live the dyslexic brain. I'm not wearing it right now because it's a t-shirt and it's, although I live in Spain, it is not that warm right now. Thank you very much.